Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Elder gods, elemental powers, and eldritch monsters that defy human comprehension. We're talking cosmic horror today, and we're going to be looking at some of the most popularly read books of this subgenre as listed on Goodreads. And I'm going to argue that some of the best stories in this subgenre were not written by the master of madness himself, H.P. Lovecraft. Please join the conversation. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Thanks so much for joining us. If you are a subscriber, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. We're over 200 subscribers now, 220 at last count, and I couldn't be more thrilled. Thank you so much, and thank you especially for the comments that you guys have been leaving in the videos. If you take a look at the last couple of postings, that we've had some tremendous conversations. You guys have been leaving some amazing recommendations. And what we've been doing is I'm collecting these and putting them into a master list that I hope to post out there either in comments on the page somehow, or maybe on our Damper 3 blog, which we're renovating as we speak. So thank you so much for all of that. If you haven't subscribed to us, please do. Please join the conversation. We'd love to hear your inputs, and the recommendations you guys are making are going to be used to fill out and update some of the topics we've covered in the past about classic fantasy, classic science fiction, and classic horror. Speaking of horror, let's go ahead and jump into it. Today we are talking cosmic horror. Now, what I find interesting about cosmic horror as a subgenre is there seems to be a little bit of vagueness on how you define it. If you go to Wikipedia, who doesn't, you'll find that they cite something called the Encyclopedia Cthulhiana, talking about cosmic horror, and they define it as this: horror that emphasizes the unknowable and incomprehensible as opposed to blood and gore. Okay, that sounds pretty good. These stories typically have characters that are placed in settings where they have to come face to face with powers that are so evil and so powerful that not only is it horrific, but it practically drives them to insanity because these powers are incomprehensible. And I know they're so vast and so mind-boggling that the characters themselves can't even really wrap their brains around it. As we dive into this, a word on how we're going to be rating these. The author has to tell a story that's not only scary, but also the threat that they're facing has to be nearly incomprehensible to the characters, but comprehensible enough for us as readers to be able to appreciate it. So what I found is that some of the classics of the genre, the ones that we're going to cover today, they do a great job with the storytelling piece, but not all of them rise to the level of what I think of is cosmic horror. The horror piece is essential to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rate each story on two pieces. The storytelling piece. And essential to that is, does the author give us enough to understand the story, appreciate the story, but do they leave enough left to the imagination? In my opinion, you can't have cosmic horror that explains everything. There's got to be a lot of mystery because it's incomprehensible, right? But it can't also just use it as an excuse not to develop what's going on here. So how well does the author balance the storytelling with the incomprehensible side of the vast cosmic dread that the characters are facing? And the other side, so that's the storytelling piece. And then the other thing that we're going to be rating, that'll be 1 to 5. We're going to be rating 1 to 5 as well, the cosmic horror piece. Is it scary? Okay, so storytelling 1 to 5, horror 1 to 5, and that will bring us down to what I think are the best cosmic horror stories and authors that we're going to be covering today. So let's start with number 6, the master of horror himself, the master of madness, H.P. Lovecraft. H.P. Lovecraft, of course, is the father of cosmic horror. The genre itself is described as Lovecraftian horror as much as it is ever cosmic horror. And so he obviously did a lot to establish this as a credible subgenre and an entertaining subgenre. And he's really, really good at it. But I got to admit, some of the classics of the genre, the two that we're going to talk about here that rate highly on Goodreads and that I think most people have heard of, I don't think are the best cosmic horror stories out there. So let's go for it. At the Mountains of Madness and The Call of Cthulhu, two classics that if you talk about the genre at all will always come up. And though they have their strengths and are entertaining in their own right, they fall short in a couple of different ways. So let me make my case. So let's start with At the Mountains of Madness. This classic of H.P. Lovecraft details an Antarctic expedition What they find instead is the evidence of a lost civilization that completely upends understanding of science and history and the evolution of the earth. They end up uncovering things that unleash horror that they have to survive, right? So that's where we're going to leave kind of the plot summary. But the story is long, and the story starts out so strong. But I'll warn you, I felt it was a little on the tedious side. H.P. Lovecraft seemed to delight in trying to make his story sound as scientific as possible, to the point that I kind of got a little bit antsy reading it. It was almost dry. Parts of it came across as dry in a scientific or clinical sort of way. But as the story went along, he started giving you those nuggets of horror about what's going on and the threats that the main characters face, and it starts to pull you in. However, it falls short, in my opinion, and I'll only say this. I feel like it violates an important tenet of cosmic horror, in that he explains too much. So on the storytelling side of things, though it is well written and again engaging in parts, I feel that by the time you're done with it, there's not a whole lot of mystery. Matter of fact, if you take it as canon for the entire H.P. Lovecraft mythos, I feel that the story at the Mountains of Madness undermines a lot of the terror that you would experience reading his other works. So take that as a little bit of a warning. I kind of ignore At the Mountains of Madness because, again, the story goes through and explains a lot of the mythology that kind of gets pulled in piecemeal throughout much of his stories, and I really felt like it just went too far. On the cosmic horror side of things, I'm going to give it at the same level. It just wasn't scary after about the first half of it. When you don't know what's going on, when you've got the element of what's happening here, yes, it is scary and it does draw you in. But as you progress, you feel like you're told way too much and you understand your antagonist in the story a little too deeply. And I felt that from a cosmic horror side of things, it made the unexplainable explainable and the incomprehensible comprehensible. I didn't really enjoy At the Mountains of Madness as much as I thought it would. I read it years ago and I revisited it for this video, and my opinion of it actually kind of sank a little bit. I give it a 3 on both sides. 3 out of 5 stars for readability and 3 out of 5 for the cosmic horror. Now let's move on to The Call of Cthulhu, which, again, classic of the genre, and it does so well initially. So The Call of Cthulhu, this classic of the genre, tells the story of the nephew of a professor who passed away, and this nephew starts collecting some of the notes of this project, this research that his uncle was doing, and uncovers this worldwide cult that worships the great Cthulhu, the elder gods, the folks that make the bread and butter of H.P. Lovecraft's mythology. It is so well written. It's engaging. It draws you in. This globe-spanning conspiracy, it seems, of those that worship these creatures from ages ago. From a storytelling perspective, I felt like The Call of Cthulhu 5. It was really, really well done. Had me drawn in through the whole time. On the horror side, 4. So better than At the Mountains of Madness, but it falls apart at the end. And I'm not going to go into the details, of course, but in my opinion, I would love to hear from folks who have read the story or folks who do read the story. I felt it was anticlimactic. You have the great Cthulhu himself. The Call of Cthulhu is about him, and it ends in a way that I was very disappointed in. So H.P. Lovecraft, if you look at his works, you'll find so many well-written, legitimately scary stories. But I found that these 2 stories in particular didn't really work out very well. And I need to make 2 more points about H.P. Lovecraft. The first, and I mentioned this in my Classics of Horror video, so you can skip ahead if you'd like. But the first thing is that H.P., his works, you don't want to read them a bunch of H.P. Lovecraft back to back to back. And the reason for that is that he has very commonly used turns of phrase and expressions that he uses to describe it. And it kind of gets on your nerves after a while. Cyclopean, that's a favorite word of his, and cosmic gulfs and gabled roofs and things like that. As you read his books, you'll see these expressions so often, you kind of start getting a little annoyed. At least I found myself doing that. If you're going to read H.P. Lovecraft, read a story of his, go read something else, come back to another story a little bit later, that kind of thing, because you'll enjoy it a lot more. But the second thing, and I have a reason for telling you this, is that H.P. Lovecraft, his works have kind of got a fly in the ointment because his history as a racist. Now, this is pertinent here because even though this, of course, was way back when and what have you, and you know, maybe people were a little bit more ignorant in the early 20th century or whatever you want to do to explain away his racism, it makes it into some of the stories. Not the two that I mentioned necessarily, though you do find unflattering descriptions of other races sometimes, and that kind of sticks out, but there are other things that are a lot more blatant. And he's also done other works that are blatantly racist. And the reason why I bring that up is because what we find is in the cosmic horror genre, a couple of really good books have come out where that piece of real world, those real world facts come into play in some of the books that we're going to talk about here in just a second, including my favorite of all the cosmic horror books. Okay, so H.P. Lovecraft, master of the genre, helped create the subgenre, but he's got some flaws. Okay, now H.P. actually had some contemporaries that contributed to the Cthulhu mythos, right? One of those contemporaries is a man by the name of Algernon Blackwood. Actually, I was recommended this work, one of his most famous stories, from a comment in the horror video that we published a few months ago. So Algernon was, again, a contemporary of H.P. and apparently, and not only is it contemporary, but H.P. Lovecraft actually cites Algernon Blackwood in at least one of his stories. And Algernon contributed to some of the Cthulhu stories himself. He wrote two stories that are considered classics of the cosmic horror genre. One of them was called The Wendigo, the other is The Willows. And both of these I really, really enjoyed. I want to put an asterisk by one of those. Now, Algernon Blackwood has written a lot of different types of horror and short stories. One of the things he's known for is using nature and the elements as the backdrop of his cosmic horror in a way that perhaps like H.P. Lovecraft didn't. And in The Willows, you see this. In this story, two friends just kind of having a good old time, just traveling down the Danube River in the early 20th century, maybe late 19th century, and they find themselves at some point at a part where the Danube River in Germany, where it kind of meanders into a marshy kind of area, and they wind up staying the night on this temporary island that's created, that's being slowly eroded by the powerful river. The things that these guys experience over the period that they're on this island are really and truly creepy. I found the storytelling was very, very well done. It was fresh, especially coming from H.P. Lovecraft type writing. It was engaging, and the horror was legitimately scary. And to my delight, he doesn't, at least in these stories, he doesn't tip his hand too much. You see the things that are happening, you don't quite know where it's beginning, where it's ending. Are they gods? Are they elementals? What are the forces that the characters are facing? And to me, that's perfect. The Willows, I would give the horror side a 4 out of 5. If only just to say that I read it and I didn't lose any sleep about it. But again, the setup I thought was great, and I think you'd enjoy that story. Now, The Wendigo tells the story of a group of folks who are up in the Canadian wilderness, and they are camping. They're hunting, actually. They're hunting for elk, I think, elk or moose. And they end up making an encounter with the Wendigo, which is this ancient beast that roams the northern climes in Canadian and Indian lore. Really, it's got its moments. The story I thought was very well written. It was also creepy. It definitely a 4 or 5 stars for that. We'll say 5 stars for the storytelling. There were a couple of parts that kind of surprised me. I remember when I realized what was happening, kind of gave me a shudder. So from that perspective, it was really good. The horror side of things, I'm going to give it a 4. Or you're given just enough to want more. and that was great. But what I found was that at the end of the story, I was just a little bit disappointed that a little bit more wasn't given. I was also disappointed too because there's some very blatant racist tones in there. When you read these things, the derogatory descriptions of Native Americans, for instance, and there's some other words used in there for African Americans, and at one point, it threw me off. So from that perspective, maybe that took me out of the vibe for a little bit. So I would give it a 4 out of 5 on that side. Algernon Blackwood, definitely a master of the genre. Let's talk about something a little bit more recent. Lovecraft Country by author Matt Ruff, published in 2016. This book has been turned into a series, I think by HBO. I vaguely remember when it first came out, which wasn't that long ago, but I didn't realize it was based on books until recently. And so I read the first book in the series. I'm not sure how many there are of these, but Lovecraft Country has a fascinating premise. What this book is actually is a series of interconnected short stories that wind up circling back into an overall arc. And it's pretty fascinating. The main characters are all African Americans, and the story is set in the Jim Crow era, in the 1950s. So the setting of the story is this constant racism faced by the characters of the story, also in the context of horror. So what I found was that each story, the characters were related, they all knew each other, and it all circled back. But I found that some of the characters I found more enjoyable than others. Some of the stories, of course, I found more enjoyable than others. The storytelling was top notch, and you get so frustrated. You're reading this, and just the act of traveling across the country, the protagonists are facing daily horror because of being pulled over by police for no reason, for being harassed by people, by not being served when they stop at restaurants or what have you. Just the daily racism faced, that in itself is a horror that the characters are facing. But then you have the supernatural that's going on as well. One of the first characters you're introduced to, for instance, is a man by the name of Atticus. He was a returning veteran from the Korean War. He winds up in this journey up into New England to what they call Lovecraft Country because he was a fan of fantasy and science fiction and horror, and he enjoyed H.P. Lovecraft growing up until his dad had to point out just how racist H.P. was. Now, the story is Lovecraftian. Some of the stories parallel some of Lovecraft's work. The storytelling was top-notch. The characters are fun to read. So I give that a high marks, 5 out of 5 on that. You'll find yourself truly engaged throughout this whole book, and it went by fast. The cosmic horror side, though, I only give it a 3 out of 5 stars. And the reason is because what you find as you read through this, or what I found as I read through the story, was that I soon stopped fearing for the characters. I was pretty certain the way the stories were panning out that the characters weren't in any real danger, that they were too likable, they were going to survive the ordeals that they were facing. And so I almost felt like I was just being told a fun story as opposed to a scary story. There are elements, each story, there are elements that grabbed me, and I thought, oh, that's kind of creepy, but I never really felt threatened for the characters, as fun as they are and as engaging as they are. So the story is a great read. It's a fun read. I recommend it. But as far as cosmic horror is concerned, I don't feel like, and besides that, the story, some of them wound up being closer to ghost stories than cosmic horror. There's a couple in there that I would say were more like on the cosmic horror side. Hippolyta Disturbs the Universe, for one. That one was kind of borderline with it. I recommend it. It's well done. Read it, but from a cosmic horror side, it's not at the top of the list. Number 3, Annihilation by Jeff VanderMeer. This book came out in 2014, and it was subsequently turned into a movie with Natalie Portman. I have not seen the movie, though I plan on watching it now that I've read the book. This book is the first of a series called the Southern Reach Trilogy, and it's set in this place called Area X, and it's neat because you just get introduced to it. And again, what I love about cosmic horror is that you don't have the sense that you know what's going on, or that you're even going to know everything that's going on. You have this area called Area X. All you know is that it is on the Earth, and its existence is a mystery, and it's been explored and researched by the government for a number of years now. And this is the 13th, I believe, expedition into Area X, because the others ended tragically, suddenly, or mysteriously. And so the characters of the story, you never get to know their names. That's one of the interesting things here, is that the character lets you know pretty quickly that she didn't really feel like there's a need to commit names to memory. You have these characters who are chosen for various specialties, geology, archaeology, that kind of thing, to go exploring into Area X to try to document what they can and to help solve the riddle of what's going on there. And you find out pretty quickly that there's something pretty scary, pretty spooky going on. If you look at this book in the library, it's listed under sci-fi, and that's fair, because a lot of cosmic horror often borders on extraterrestrial type stuff. Think Alien. As the main character finds herself traveling through Area X, she's racing against the clock for reasons that I won't divulge here. And one by one, the characters again, they get knocked off. That's not really a spoiler. They tell you pretty quickly up front what's going to happen there. But the story is well executed, lots of creepiness. Jeff VanderMeer does an excellent job leading you on as he unveils just enough to make you scratch your head, wonder what's going on, and to want to proceed with the story. Goodreads, Goodreads readers have placed this as one of the best, as one of the most commonly read cosmic horror stories. I found this book very, very enjoyable. From a storytelling perspective, definitely a 5. Cosmic horror side, gave it a 4, just because as you read through it, you do get that sense it's more of a science fiction story than maybe it is a horror story. But I'm not quite sure yet, because I haven't read the other books in the series yet. So Annihilation was really neat to read. Number 2 and number 1 were they're so close. I love these 2 books. These next 2 are the ones I'm most excited about. 2016 seems to have been a banner year for cosmic horror. Not only did Lovecraft Country come out, but so did number 2 and number 1. Number 2 being The Fisherman by John Langan. The Fisherman, it was so good. It tells a story of a man named Abraham who tragically loses his wife, and he finds solace to a point in fishing. And so that's how he tells the story, how it brought him to the events that he wants to recount in this book. The story is it's excellent. It's got plenty of actual, no kidding, oh my God, that's so creepy kind of thing, kind of events in there. The storytelling is amazing. Again, you read through this thing, and he gives you glimpses of events and things and creatures without patronizing you, and also without giving away too much. So as you get through this, you get a sense that this is terrifying. There's definitely more to it behind it, but you don't need to know it for the story to continue. And to me, that's just one of the skills that's so essential to a good cosmic horror story. So John Langan does an exceptional job of the storytelling. Definitely 5 stars out of 5 stars. And the cosmic horror side, again, 5 out of 5. It's neat because sometimes you've got the character Abe telling the story through the words of someone who's telling him a story, through the words of a story, through the words of a book they read. And he does that, I think, on purpose. So you're going through this, he's telling this in a way that's smooth, understandable, but it brings in all these different perspectives somehow. And you'll see he explains how the character is able to do this in a believable way, to where you're not distracted by all these different voices that are ultimately landing at his feet to recount to you. So The Fisherman is good. It has some really no kidding creepy moments. I don't know if he's planning on doing a sequel to this, but I hope he does. So number 1, again, it was a close call. This also came out in 2016, and it's titled The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor Laval. Now this is just a clever cleverly written book. What it is it's a retelling of one of H.P. Lovecraft's old stories, Horror at Red Hook. But whereas the Horror at Red Hook tells the story from the main character's perspective of being of living in New York and being around all these dusky skinned, kind of seedy characters, he tells it from the story of a black man who lives in that neighborhood, who is affected by the events that are going on in H.P. Lovecraft's story, but he gives the context to the seedy things that the character that H.P. Lovecraft tells the story through, whose eyes that H.P. Lovecraft tells the story through. And it's just amazing. And the cool thing for me, and I'm sorry that I may have ruined it for you, is I didn't realize this was a retelling of an H.P. Lovecraft story. So as I was reading, I was thinking, this sounds an awful lot like H.P. Lovecraft's material. So then it dawned on me, and I got super excited that he was writing in the H.P. Lovecraft mythology. The story unwinds in just a terrific fashion. It's a novella. It's a little short, but it feels so complete. The descriptions of the adversaries in here, the bad guys, if you will, you know there's more behind them than what you see. He hints at it when he needs to. He gives you enough to truly be afraid. But the story is just really, really neat. Just like with Lovecraft Country, one of the main characters that he tells, the African American, he has to experience the social racism that existed in the early 1920s when this story takes place, but it quickly escalates into the supernatural threats as well as the types of threats he faces just living in America in the 1920s. So storytelling, 5 stars out of 5 stars. From a cosmic horror side, when you finally get to experience the true the overlapping elements of H.P. Lovecraft's story, it's a thrill. And it's got some truly creepy moments. So this one nudged its way out. 5 stars out of 5 for the cosmic horror side. Laval does a fantastic job of telling the story. And if you get a copy of the book that has his epilogue where it explains the genesis of the story, you gotta read it. It's powerful stuff. That's my list. That's my top 6 cosmic horror authors. I want to know what you think. Please leave a comment. If you haven't subscribed to us, please do. We love to hear your comments. And thank you so much for your time. And everyone, have a fantastic day. See you next time.